You need to leave this section right now.
I have a first-class ticket.
That's impossible. Get out!
Why would a seasoned airline captain stop an entire boarding process just to throw a quiet teenage girl out of first class, only to discover that before the aircraft ever reached the runway, his own career had already begun to fall apart? The morning sun spilled across the polished windows of Boston Logan International Airport, painting long bands of gold across the marble floor. Travelers hurried past with coffee cups, rolling luggage, and tired smiles. Business executives checked their watches. Grandparents hugged grandchildren goodbye. Flight attendants moved with practiced confidence through the terminal. Among them walked 17-year-old Ava Carter. She carried herself differently from most teenagers. Not because she was trying to impress anyone. Quite the opposite. She wore dark jeans, clean white sneakers, and a navy cardigan over a simple blouse. No designer logos, no expensive jewelry. Just a black leather backpack slung over one shoulder and a hardcover novel tucked beneath her arm. She looked like any honor student heading home after a school program. No one paid much attention to her. At the gate for Flight 87 to San Francisco, passengers formed an orderly line. First class boarded first. The gate agent smiled after scanning Ava's boarding pass. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Carter." "Thank you," Ava answered with a polite smile. She stepped through the jet bridge without hesitation. Inside the aircraft, the cabin glowed with soft lighting. Cream-colored leather seats stretched across the first-class section. Fresh flowers sat near the galley. Quiet jazz floated through hidden speakers. Ava found seat 2 Alpha beside the window. She placed her backpack beneath the seat, folded her cardigan neatly across her lap, and looked outside at the baggage crews loading containers below. Everything felt peaceful until someone stopped walking. Captain Richard Hayes had just entered the cabin after completing his exterior inspection. At 56 years old, Richard had spent more than 3 decades flying commercial aircraft. His silver hair was perfectly combed beneath his captain's hat. His uniform looked flawless. 4 gold stripes gleamed on each shoulder. Many younger pilots admired him. Many flight attendants feared him. He believed experience gave him instincts no policy manual could teach. Those instincts had rarely been questioned. His eyes drifted across the first-class cabin. Then they stopped. A teenage black girl, alone, in one of the most expensive seats on the airplane. He frowned. For several seconds he simply stared. A flight attendant noticed his expression. "Everything okay, Captain?" Richard nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Ava. "Who's traveling with her?" "I believe she's alone." "You believe?" The flight attendant glanced toward the boarding screen on her tablet. Her reservation shows a confirmed first-class ticket. Richard's jaw tightened. "Double check." "It's already been verified at the gate," I said. "Double check." The flight attendant hesitated only a moment before walking toward Ava. "Good morning, miss. May I see your boarding pass one more time?" Ava looked surprised but remained calm. Of course, she handed it over without asking why. The attendant compared the digital code with her tablet. Everything matched. Seat 2 Alpha. Paid in full. No alerts, no restrictions. She returned the boarding pass with an apologetic smile. "Thank you very much." Ava nodded. "No problem." The attendant walked back toward Richard. "Everything is correct." Richard crossed his arms. "I've seen fraudulent boarding passes before, and you know that for certain?" "Yes, Captain." Richard looked around the cabin. Several passengers had quietly begun watching the exchange. An elderly couple exchanged uneasy glances. A businessman slowly lowered his newspaper. Across the aisle, a retired schoolteacher felt her stomach tighten. She had spent 40 years telling children that fairness mattered. Something about this moment felt painfully familiar. Richard took several deliberate steps toward Ava. His polished shoes echoed against the cabin floor. He stopped beside her seat. His voice remained controlled, almost cold. "Young lady, I'm going to need you to come with me." Ava looked up slowly. Her brown eyes were steady. "Is there a problem, Captain?" "There may be. I don't understand. I'll explain outside the aircraft." The entire first-class cabin fell silent. No one reached for a phone, no one spoke, but almost everyone stopped breathing for just a moment. Something had shifted, and deep down, even Richard Hayes did not realize he had just crossed a line that would soon become impossible to erase. Ava slowly stood, smoothing the front of her cardigan before slipping her boarding pass back into her backpack. She never raised her voice. She never rolled her eyes. The quiet confidence in her movements unsettled the people watching far more than anger would have. "Am I being asked to leave the aircraft?" she asked. Captain Richard Hayes looked directly at her. "I'm asking you to step outside while we verify a few things. My ticket has already been verified, I understand. Then what exactly needs to be verified?" Richard paused. His answer came a second too late. "My responsibility is the safety of everyone on board." The words echoed through the silent cabin. A retired Air Force mechanic sitting across the aisle frowned. He had spent decades around aviation. Safety checks had rules, procedures, documentation. They were never supposed to depend on someone's appearance. The lead flight attendant, Melissa Grant, shifted uneasily beside the captain. "Captain," she said quietly, "operations has already cleared every passenger." Richard barely looked at her. "I'll handle this." Melissa swallowed the rest of her sentence. She knew his reputation. Questioning him in front of passengers almost never ended well. Ava took a slow breath. "I don't want to cause trouble. No one is saying you are. It feels like you are." Richard folded his arms. "I'm simply asking for cooperation." She nodded once. "I've cooperated from the beginning." Another silence settled over the cabin. The businessman who had lowered his newspaper finally spoke. "Captain, if her documents are valid, why remove her?" Richard turned toward him. "Sir, this is a crew matter. I'm a frequent flyer. I've never seen this happen. I appreciate your concern." The businessman leaned back but continued watching. Near the front galley, another flight attendant quietly exchanged worried looks with Melissa. Neither of them liked what they were seeing. Neither wanted to challenge the captain again. Ava picked up her backpack. "I'll step outside," she said calmly. "But before I do, I'd like your full name." Richard blinked. "My name is Captain Richard Hayes." "Thank you." She repeated it softly, almost as if committing it to memory. Melissa noticed that. Something about the way Ava spoke made her wonder if this young woman understood far more than she was showing. As Ava walked toward the aircraft door, passengers moved their legs into the aisle to give her room. An elderly woman reached out gently and touched Ava's hand. "I'm sorry you're going through this." Ava smiled politely. "So am I." Outside the aircraft, the cool air inside the jet bridge felt strangely heavy. The airport noise drifted in from the terminal, rolling suitcases. Announcements overhead, children laughing somewhere in the distance. Inside that ordinary morning, something deeply unfair was unfolding. Richard stopped a few feet from Ava. "I'll need another form of identification." She handed him her driver's license without hesitation. He studied it. Everything matched. Her name, her age, her address. No irregularities. He looked at her again. "You said you're traveling alone." "Yes." "Why, my mother is meeting me in California. What does she do?" Ava hesitated for the first time. I don't think that's relevant. It helps establish context. My ticket already establishes that." Richard's expression hardened. "You seem unusually confident." "I was taught to stay calm by your mother." "Yes." "What kind of work does she do?" Ava looked him in the eye. "She taught me never to judge people before knowing who they are." For just a second, Richard had no reply. Melissa stepped into the jet bridge carrying a tablet. "Captain!" "What?" "I just received another confirmation from customer support." "He did not answer," she repeated carefully. "The reservation was purchased directly through the airline. There are no payment issues. No fraud alerts. Nothing." Richard exhaled through his nose. "I still don't like it." Melissa stared at him. Respectfully, not liking it isn't the same as having a reason. Richard's face tightened. "I'll decide what qualifies as a reason." Melissa lowered her eyes. She knew she had already said too much. Ava quietly reached into her backpack. Richard immediately stiffened. "What are you reaching for?" "My phone." She held it up before touching the screen. "I'd like to make a call." Richard glanced toward airport security officers standing farther down the concourse. "You may have." Ava nodded. She unlocked the phone with steady hands. She searched for only one contact, Mum. The call connected almost instantly. A warm voice answered before the first ring had fully ended. "Hi, sweetheart, are you boarding?" Ava looked once toward Richard. Then she spoke in the same calm voice she had used all morning. "No, Mum." A brief pause. "They removed me from the flight." Everything on the other end of the line went completely silent. Not angry, not confused, just silent. Ava knew that silence. It meant her mother had already stopped whatever she was doing, and somewhere hundreds of miles away, a woman with influence far beyond this airport quietly stood up from her chair. The voice on the other end of the line remained quiet for another moment. Then Victoria Carter spoke. "Are you safe?" "Yes. Did anyone touch you?" "No. Were you threatened?" Her tone never changed. Calm, measured, controlled. "I want you to stay exactly where you are." "I will. I'm leaving a meeting now. You don't have to." Ava lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." Victoria's voice softened. "You have nothing to apologize for." The call ended. No dramatic words, no shouting, just certainty. Captain Richard Hayes watched her slide the phone back into her backpack. "Is someone coming?" "My mother." Richard gave a small nod. "Good. She can help clear this up." Ava looked at him without saying another word. Across the country, nearly 3,000 miles away in downtown Chicago, Victoria Carter walked out of a glass conference room overlooking the city skyline. Around the polished table sat investment executives, attorneys, and financial advisors. A presentation froze halfway through a slide. No one spoke. Everyone had noticed the expression on Victoria's face. She rarely interrupted meetings. She never walked out. Her chief legal officer hurried after her. "Victoria." She kept walking. "Cancel the rest of today." "Everything." "What happened?" "My daughter was removed from an aircraft." The attorney slowed. "What airline?" Victoria answered, without breaking stride. "Aurora National." The attorney's expression changed instantly. "They know who she is?" "I don't believe they do." She reached the private elevator. Her assistant was already waiting with a tablet. "Prepare my aircraft. The jet can be ready in 40 minutes. I'll to take the company helicopter to Midway, understood. And call Daniel Brooks." "The chairman immediately." The assistant nodded. Everyone inside the executive office knew one fact the public rarely discussed. Victoria Carter was not the public face of Aurora National Airlines. She preferred it that way. But through Carter Capital Partners, she controlled the largest voting bloc in the airline's parent company. She almost never interfered with daily operations. Almost never. Back in Boston, boarding had stopped. Passengers remained seated. The aircraft door stayed open. People whispered quietly. Some wondered whether there had been a security issue. Others suspected discrimination. No one knew the full story. Melissa Grant walked back into first class carrying bottled water. She handed one to the elderly woman who had comforted Ava. "Thank you," the woman whispered. Melissa forced a smile. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation in the jet bridge. Richard had no evidence, only suspicion, and suspicion was never supposed to replace policy. She quietly opened the airline operations manual on her tablet. She searched emergency removal procedures. Medical emergency, intoxication, threatening behavior, forgery, crew interference. Nothing matched Ava Carter. Melissa closed the tablet. A knot formed in her stomach. Meanwhile, Richard stood near the aircraft door, speaking with the station supervisor. "I don't care that her documents are valid." The supervisor lowered his voice. "Then what exactly is the concern, my judgment?" "Capt, corporate policy requires an articulable safety reason. I've been flying longer than most people writing those policies. I understand." "No, you don't." The supervisor glanced toward Ava. She stood quietly near the windows overlooking the runway. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't crying. She simply watched aircraft taking off into the bright blue sky. The supervisor looked back at Richard. "This situation is attracting attention." Richard shrugged. "Let it." Several gate agents nearby had already begun exchanging uneasy looks. One quietly sent a message to airport customer relations documenting what had happened. Another noted the exact time boarding had stopped. No one announced it. But people were beginning to protect themselves. Inside the terminal, a retired federal judge walking toward another gate recognized the tension immediately. He stopped beside the supervisor. "Everything all right? We're handling it." The judge looked toward Ava, then toward Richard. His instincts, sharpened by decades on the bench, told him something was deeply wrong. Not legally proven, just humanly obvious. Back in Chicago, Victoria's helicopter lifted into the morning sky. As the city disappeared beneath her, Daniel Brooks finally answered his secure phone. "Victoria, I need information. I'm listening. My daughter was removed from Flight 87. Silence, then one question. Was there a security incident? No. Medical? No. What reason was given? A captain decided she didn't belong. Daniel closed his eyes. I'll start making calls. No. Victoria's voice became firmer. Don't warn anyone. You want this handled quietly. I want it handled honestly. If procedures were violated, they deserve to answer for them. The helicopter banked west toward the airport. Victoria looked out the window. She wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about responsibility. Every company liked to advertise words like dignity, respect, and inclusion. The real test came on ordinary mornings, when no cameras were present, when no headlines existed, when one employee decided another human being deserved less because of an assumption. Thousands of feet below, Flight 87 remained at the gate. The engines were still silent, the passengers were still waiting, and without realizing it, Captain Richard Hayes had already given enough time for events far beyond his control to begin moving toward Boston. Victoria's helicopter had barely landed before her phone rang again. Daniel Brooks spoke first. I've confirmed the flight is still at the gate. Who authorized the delay? The captain requested additional time. Victoria stepped onto the tarmac where a company car was already waiting. Has corporate operations been notified? They've received a preliminary report. Only a preliminary one? So far. Victoria looked through the tinted window as the car accelerated toward the private terminal. That won't last. Meanwhile, inside Aurora National's Operations Control Center in Dallas, dozens of large screens tracked flights across the country. Dispatchers monitored weather, maintenance reports, crew schedules, and departures. Everything looked normal until a supervisor's phone rang. This is operations. A calm female voice answered. This is Victoria Carter. The supervisors immediately sat straighter. Good morning, Miss Carter. I need the status of Flight 87. He opened the live operational screen. The aircraft remains at the gate in Boston. Why? A captain initiated an additional passenger review. What safety event has been documented? He clicked through the incident log. Nothing. No medical emergency. No security alert. No mechanical issue. His forehead tightened. I don't currently see a documented safety event. Victoria did not raise her voice. I see. She let the silence settle. Then she asked another question. Has the flight exceeded its scheduled departure? Yes. By how long? The supervisor checked the clock. Approximately 20 minutes. Who approved that operational delay? Another pause. I don't believe anyone has yet. Thank you. The line disconnected. The supervisor stared at the screen. Then he immediately called the director of flight operations. In Boston, passengers had now been sitting quietly for far too long. The businessman finally stood. He approached Melissa near the galley. Excuse me. Yes, sir. I have a connecting flight. I understand. Can someone explain what's happening? Melissa chose her words carefully. The captain is reviewing an operational matter. Does that matter involve the young woman? Melissa hesitated. I'm not able to discuss passengers. He nodded. I figured. As he returned to his seat, several other travelers looked at him hopefully. He simply shook his head. No answers. Outside the aircraft, Ava remained seated near the gate windows. She watched another Aurora National jet lift gracefully into the bright morning sky. An airport customer service representative approached with a bottle of water. I'm Emily. Thank you. Emily handed her the bottle. It's all right. No. Emily replied gently. It really isn't. Ava looked at her for the first time. Emily smiled. My grandmother always told me something. What was that? People remember how you make them feel long after they forget what you said. Ava smiled faintly. My mum says something similar. I thought she might. The conversation ended there. Neither woman needed more words. Across the concourse, Richard Hayes stood with folded arms watching through the terminal windows. He noticed Ava laughing softly at something Emily had said. That irritated him. He could not explain why. Part of him expected fear or frustration. Instead, he saw composure. It made him question himself. Only for a second. Then his pride pushed the doubt away. Station manager Kevin Marshall hurried toward him carrying a tablet. Captain, what now? We've received multiple requests from operations asking for your written justification. I'll submit it. They need it now. Richard took the tablet. The incident report opened. Reason for passenger removal. He stared at the blank field. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. He typed, Captain discretion regarding potential safety concern. Kevin read it. What specific concern? My professional judgment. They're asking for observable facts. Richard looked up. My judgment is the fact. Kevin's expression changed. He had worked in aviation for 20 years. He knew documentation mattered. Feelings were not evidence. I need something more specific. Richard handed the tablet back. That's all I'm providing. Kevin walked away without another word. His stomach had begun to sink. In Dallas, the incident report appeared on another supervisor's screen. He read it twice, then a third time. Nothing concrete. Nothing verifiable. He picked up the phone. Legal needs to see this. Another. Call followed. Human resources. Then another. Corporate risk. The issue was no longer staying inside Boston. It was spreading, quietly, methodically, like cracks moving beneath solid ice. Victoria's car finally reached the private terminal. Her assistant met her beside the waiting aircraft. The board chairman has been briefed. His response? He wants to know whether this should remain a local matter. Victoria stopped walking. She looked directly at her assistant. When someone with authority treats another person unfairly without evidence, it stops being assistant nodded. Victoria continued toward the aircraft stairs. Have every recording from that gate preserved. Already requested. Cabin cameras. The aircraft has cockpit security recordings and gate surveillance. Preserve everything. She climbed aboard. The cabin door closed behind her. Minutes later, the engines roared to life. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, another message quietly entered Aurora National's internal communication system. Priority executive notice. Preserve all records related to Flight 87. Do not alter reports. Do not delete communications. Mandatory review pending. No explanation accompanied the notice. None was needed. Across multiple offices, experienced managers stopped what they were doing. They had seen messages like this before. They almost never ended well for the person who triggered them. Captain Richard Hayes was halfway through reviewing the flight release paperwork when his company phone vibrated. The caller identification displayed only one word, operations. He answered immediately. Hayes. A composed voice replied. Captain, this is Michael Turner from Flight Operations. What can I do for you? We've received your incident report.
Good, we need clarification. I already provided it.
There was a brief pause. Captain, you cited professional judgment. That's correct. We're asking what observable behavior created the concern. Richard looked through the terminal windows toward Ava. She was still sitting quietly beside the gate, reading her novel as if she had nowhere else to be. She raised my concern. Based on what? My experience. Michael remained professional. Experience normally leads to specific observations. Richard's patience was fading. I've been flying longer than you've probably worked there. I respect your experience, then trust it. We're required to document facts. I've given you everything. Michael took a slow breath. Thank you, Captain. The call ended, not because the questions had been answered, because they had not. Inside the operations center, Michael looked toward the Vice President of Flight Operations. He still hasn't identified a single policy violation. The Vice President frowned. Keep documenting. Another manager entered carrying fresh information. Customer Relations has already received 3 complaints from passengers on that flight. About the delay, no. About the removal. The room became noticeably quieter. Back in Boston, Kevin Marshall approached Melissa near the boarding desk. Has anyone from the crew reported disruptive behavior from the passenger? Melissa answered without hesitation. No. Any argument? No. Any refusal to cooperate? None. Any threatening comments? Absolutely not. Kevin wrote every answer into his notebook. He knew those notes might later matter far more than anyone realized. A few feet away, an elderly couple quietly discussed what they had witnessed. The husband shook his head. I served as a police officer for over 30 years. His wife looked at him. What do you think? I think reasonable suspicion has to be based on something. And here, I haven't seen anything except assumptions. Neither of them spoke again. Sometimes older people recognized injustice, but because they had lived long enough to watch history repeat itself. Across the terminal, Ava closed her book as Emily returned carrying a small paper bag. I brought you something. You didn't have to. I know. Emily handed her a sandwich and fresh fruit. The cafe insisted. Please thank them. They already know why. Ava looked surprised. They do? Emily nodded. People notice more than we think. For the first time that morning, Ava felt her throat tighten. Kindness often arrived quietly, without cameras, without speeches, without expecting anything in return. She whispered one simple sentence, "Thank you." Emily smiled. My father used to say that dignity is easiest to give away and hardest to get back. Ava looked down at the paper bag. I'll remember that. Not far away, Richard noticed airport employees speaking with Ava. He disliked how much attention the situation was attracting. He turned toward Kevin. How much longer? Kevin answered carefully. Corporate has asked us to hold the flight. Richard stared at him. On whose authority? The vice president of flight operations. For what purpose? They're reviewing the documentation. Richard laughed once. A passenger complaint is delaying an aircraft now? Kevin lowered his voice. I don't think it's just the complaint anymore. Richard's expression hardened. What does that mean? It means people have questions. I've already answered them. Kevin chose not to respond. At that exact moment, another message appeared on his tablet. Mandatory conference call. Participants required immediately. Flight operations, corporate legal, human resources, station management. Kevin silently showed the screen to Richard. Richard read it. His confidence remained. They're overreacting. Kevin wished he believed that. Hundreds of miles away, Victoria Carter's aircraft reached cruising altitude. She had not looked out the window once. Instead, she reviewed a secure digital folder that Daniel Brooks had assembled. Flight timeline, boarding records, passenger manifest, crew assignments, company policies. She read every page. She highlighted one section. Crew members may deny boarding only when objective safety concerns exist, and those concerns must be documented. She read the sentence again, then closed the tablet. Her assistant looked across the cabin. Would you like me to contact media relations? Victoria shook her head. No public affairs? No. Then what? Victoria answered quietly. The truth doesn't need a head start, the assistant understood. Victoria had built her reputation the same way she built her companies. Facts first, reactions later. Back in Boston, the public address system chimed softly. Another boarding announcement echoed through the concourse for a different flight. Passengers nearby continued moving as though nothing unusual was happening. Life inside an airport rarely stopped, but around gate 24, time seemed frozen. Then, Kevin's phone rang again. He listened for less than 30 seconds. His face slowly lost its color. He looked directly at Richard. The director of flight operations is requesting that you not close the aircraft door. Richard frowned. Why? They're sending senior leadership. Richard stared at him. From Boston?
Kevin's. No, they're flying in. The words hung in the air. They're flying in. Captain Richard Hayes stared at Kevin Marshall as if he had misheard him.
For a passenger dispute. Kevin looked down at his phone again. I wasn't given details. Richard let out a short laugh. This is getting ridiculous. No one answered. Even Melissa remained silent. She had spent enough years around corporate investigations to recognize the difference between routine questions and executive intervention. This was no longer routine. Across the terminal, Ava quietly folded the paper bag Emily had given her and placed it inside her backpack. She checked the time. Almost 2 hours had passed since she had first boarded the aircraft. Not once had she demanded an explanation. Not once had she raised her voice. Back over. Can I get you anything else? I'm all right. You've been incredibly patient. Ava smiled. My mother always says patience isn't weakness. Emily nodded. What does she say it is? A choice. Emily thought about that for a moment. I wish more people believed it. A nearby passenger overheard the conversation. He approached slowly. He looked to be in his late 70s. My name's Walter. Ava stood politely. It's nice to meet you. She waited. I wanted you to know. Not everyone sitting on that airplane agreed with what happened. Ava's eyes softened. Thank you. Walter hesitated before speaking again. I grew up during a different America. So did my grandparents. He nodded. I've spent my whole life hoping my grandchildren would not proceed people judged before they were known. Ava answered quietly. I hope they won't. Walter smiled sadly. I hope so too. He shook her hand before returning toward the boarding area. Melissa watched the exchange from a distance. She felt ashamed. Not personally, professionally. The airline constantly trained employees about respect, fairness, and customer dignity. Yet today, one teenager had demonstrated those values better than the adults around her. Inside the operations center, another conference call had begun. The vice president of flight operations spoke first. Has anyone found objective evidence supporting the captain's decision? Silence. The director of corporate security answered. No. Any intelligence alerts involving the passenger? No. Behavioral concerns? No. The vice president looked toward the company's chief legal counsel. What exposure are we looking at? The attorney answered carefully. If events occurred exactly as currently documented, our concern isn't the passenger. Then who? The decision-making process? Another silence followed. The legal counsel continued. When authority cannot explain itself with facts, every decision becomes difficult to defend. Those words stayed with everyone in the room. Back in Boston, Richard was becoming increasingly frustrated. He walked toward Kevin again. I want boarding completed. I can't authorize that. You don't authorize me. Kevin remained calm. Today I do. Richard stared at him. Excuse me? I've received direct instructions from flight operations. Richard's face reddened. I am the pilot in command, you are, and the company is conducting an active review. Richard stepped closer. You think I've done something wrong? Kevin answered honestly. I think people above both of us want to determine that. For the first time that morning, Richard felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, discomfort. His certainty had always protected him. Now it felt less solid. His phone rang again. This time the caller identification displayed the office of the chief operating officer. Richard answered immediately, Captain Hayes. A calm executive voice greeted him. Richard, good morning. I need you to answer one question. Of course. Would you make the same decision again based on everything you know right now? Richard did not hesitate. Yes. The executive remained silent for several seconds. Then he asked another question. If another captain removed your granddaughter under identical circumstances, would you consider that acceptable? Richard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The executive waited. Still no answer. Finally, Richard replied, That's different. Why? Another? Silence. The executive spoke gently. Think carefully about your answer. The line disconnected. Richard slowly lowered the phone. The question stayed with him. Not because he agreed with it, because he could not answer it. Several states away, Victoria's aircraft began its descent toward Boston. Daniel Brooks called once more. We've completed a preliminary ownership review. I know the numbers. This isn't about numbers. Victoria listened. The board unanimously agreed to preserve every communication related to this incident. Good. The Independent Ethics Committee has also been notified. Victoria looked out the window for the first time. Clouds drifted beneath the aircraft. Bright, peaceful. They acted quickly. They're concerned. They should be concerned about the truth. Daniel smiled quietly. You haven't asked for anyone to be fired. I haven't even asked who made the decision. You already know. I know a title. She paused. I don't know the man. Daniel understood exactly what she meant. Good leadership judged actions before people, not the other way around. At Logan Airport, a black executive sedan rolled quietly toward the secured service entrance beside the terminal. Airport security opened the gate without delay. Several managers, standing near the windows, noticed the vehicle. Kevin checked another message. His heartbeat quickened. He looked toward Richard. They're here. Richard glanced outside. I don't recognize that car. Kevin swallowed. It isn't airport management. The rear door opened. A woman stepped out wearing a dark navy suit and carrying nothing except a slim leather portfolio. She did not rush. She did not look angry. She simply walked with calm purpose toward the terminal. None of the passengers recognized her. Most employees did not either. But inside Aurora National's executive offices, there were very few people who would fail to recognize Victoria Carter. And within the next few minutes, Captain Richard Hayes was about to learn that the quiet teenager he had judged so easily was connected to someone whose influence reached far beyond a single flight. Victoria Carter walked through the terminal without an escort, without its security, and without drawing attention to herself. Most travelers saw only another executive in a tailored suit moving with quiet confidence. The airport managers waiting near the gate knew better. They straightened the moment they recognized her. Kevin Marshall stepped forward first. Miss Carter, I'm Kevin Marshall, the station manager. Victoria shook his hand. Thank you for meeting me. I'm very sorry about what happened. She looked at him calmly. I appreciate that. I'd like to understand exactly what happened before anyone apologizes. Her answer surprised him. She was not looking for emotion. She was looking for facts. A few yards away, Ava noticed her mother approaching. She stood immediately. Victoria crossed the distance between them and embraced her daughter. She did not ask about the airline. She did not ask about the captain. She asked only one question. "How are you feeling?" "I'm all right." Victoria studied her face. "You don't have to be strong for me." Ava smiled faintly. "I know, I'm proud of you." Ava's eyes filled for the first time that morning, but she blinked the tears away before they could fall. "I remembered what you taught me." Victoria gently squeezed her shoulder. "And what was that?" "Never let someone else's assumptions decide who you become." Victoria nodded. "Exactly." Melissa watched the exchange from inside the aircraft door. There was no anger, no dramatic confrontation, only respect. She suddenly understood why Ava had remained calm for so many hours. She had learned it from someone who lived that way. Captain Richard Hayes walked into the terminal a moment later. He saw Victoria speaking quietly with Ava. He assumed she was simply a concerned parent. He approached with professional confidence. "Mrs. Carter." Victoria turned toward him.
Captain Hayes, I understand you're Ava's mother. I am. I regret the inconvenience.
Victoria looked directly into his eyes. "My daughter tells me she was removed from a confirmed first-class seat. I requested additional verification. Based on what?" Richard answered exactly as he had all morning. "My professional judgment." Victoria waited, he continued. "I believed additional review was appropriate. What specific information caused that belief?" Richard hesitated. "I can't always explain instinct," Victoria replied softly, "but you are required to explain decisions." The words landed harder than she intended. Richard folded his arms. "I've spent decades protecting passengers, and I respect that. I've prevented situations others would have missed." "I'm sure you have." "Then you understand," Victoria shook her head. "I understand that every serious decision deserves evidence." Neither of them raised their voice. The tension came from restraint. Around them, conversations throughout the gate slowly faded. People sensed something important was happening. Kevin quietly motioned Melissa toward him. "Stay nearby," she nodded. A member of corporate legal arrived moments later carrying a laptop. Another executive followed from human resources. Then the regional director of flight operations. Richard looked from one face to another. His confidence began to crack. The regional director greeted Victoria first. "Ms. Carter, thank you for coming. We came as quickly as possible." Richard frowned. "You know each other?" The director looked at him with visible surprise. "You weren't informed. Informed about what?" The director glanced toward Victoria. She gave a small nod. He turned back to Richard. "Captain, this is Ms. Victoria Carter. I know that." The director continued. "Chief Executive of Carter Capital Partners." Richard waited. The title meant little to him. Then the director finished the sentence. "The largest voting shareholder of Aurora National's parent company." Everything stopped. Richard's face emptied. Melissa looked at Kevin. Kevin slowly closed his eyes. The businessman from first class lowered his newspaper again. Even passengers who did not fully understand corporate ownership could feel the weight of the silence. Richard looked back at Ava, then at Victoria, then at the executives surrounding them. For the first time all day, he realized this situation had never been about wealth. It had been about assumptions. Victoria noticed the change in his expression. "My position is not why we're here." Richard said nothing. "My daughter could have been any passenger." Still silence. If this happened to someone without resources, she let the sentence remain unfinished. No one needed to hear the ending. Every person standing there already understood it. The regional director spoke carefully. Captain Hayes, effective immediately. I need you to step away from all flight duties, pending a formal review." Richard stared at him. "You're removing me from the flight? I'm removing you from operational responsibility until the investigation is complete." "I've done nothing except protect this aircraft," the director answered quietly. "That is exactly what we intend to determine." Richard looked toward Victoria again. "Did you order this?" She met his eyes. "No, then who did? The policies your employer already had in place." Another long silence followed. Victoria turned toward Kevin. "I'd like copies of every report, every recording, and every witness statement. They're already being preserved." "Good," she looked at Ava. "Let's wait for the facts." Ava nodded. Around them, the atmosphere changed. This was no longer a disagreement between a captain and a passenger. It had become a test of whether an institution would live by the principles it claimed to represent. And everyone at Gate 24 knew they had just witnessed the moment the balance of power quietly shifted. The conference room beside the gate filled within minutes. The glass walls overlooked the runway, but no one paid attention to the aircraft outside anymore. Folders were opened, laptops came alive, every conversation became quieter. Victoria sat beside Ava instead of at the head of the table. It was a small decision, but everyone noticed it. She had influence, yet she refused to use intimidation. The regional directors began. Before we continue, I want to make one thing clear. This is a fact-finding meeting. No conclusions have been reached. Victoria nodded. That's exactly how it should be. Captain Richard Hayes sat across from them. His cap rested on the table. His shoulders were still straight, but the confidence that had carried him through the morning was beginning to fade. Corporate legal switched on a monitor. We've reviewed the boarding records. The first document appeared. Passenger check-in. Completed. Identity verified, government identification matched. Ticket purchased directly from the airline. Seat assignment and confirmed, no security alerts, no payment issues, no watch list notifications. The attorney looked toward Richard. Captain, can you identify any factual error in these records? Richard looked at the screen. No. Another document appeared. Gate agent verification, everything properly completed. Another customer service review. No irregularities. Then another. Flight attendant statement from Melissa Grant. Passenger remained calm. Passenger complied with every instruction. Passenger displayed no disruptive behavior. The room fell silent. The regional director folded his hands. Captain Hayes, is there any information not reflected in these reports that influenced your decision? Richard took a slow breath. I believed something felt wrong. What specifically? I can't explain it. The attorney spoke gently. Our procedures require observable facts. Richard looked frustrated. I understand the procedures. Then help us understand what you observed. Again, there was nothing. Not because Richard wanted to hide evidence. There simply wasn't any. Melissa lowered her eyes. She almost felt sorry for him. Not because he was being questioned, because she could see him slowly realizing that certainty without evidence becomes impossible to defend. The Human Resources Director opened another file. This is not a disciplinary document. Everyone looked up. It is a record of previous coaching conversations. Richard's expression changed. There were 2 informal discussions over the past several years regarding communication with passengers. The director continued carefully. No formal findings, no discrimination complaints sustained, no suspension. Richard nodded. I remember. The concern noted in both conversations involved relying on assumptions before gathering information. No one spoke. The words echoed far beyond the paper. Victoria remained completely still. She did not interrupt. She did not react. She simply listened. Ava glanced toward Richard. For the first time, she noticed something different. He no longer looked angry. He looked tired. Very tired. The regional director turned toward Victoria. Miss Carter, do you wish to make a statement? She answered quietly. Only one. Everyone waited. I don't want special treatment. She looked around the room. My daughter should not have been treated differently because of who I am. Then she paused. But she also should not have been treated differently because no one knew who I am. The sentence settled over the room. Several executives slowly nodded. That was the issue. Not wealth, not status, not ownership. Fairness had to exist before identity became known. Otherwise, it was not fairness at all. Walter, the retired police officer, had been asked if he would provide a witness statement before continuing his trip. He stepped into the room. I'll keep this short. The regional director thanked him. Walter looked directly at Richard. I spent over 3 decades making decisions that affect people's lives. Richard listened quietly. I learned something the hard way. He paused. When you carry authority long enough, you begin trusting your instincts. Richard nodded slightly. Walter continued. But experience should teach you when to slow down, not when to stop asking for evidence. The room remained silent. Walter smiled sadly. That's all I wanted to say. He left without another word. The statement lasted less than 2 minutes. It carried more weight than an hour of arguments. Late that afternoon, Flight 87 finally received a replacement captain. Passengers quietly reboarded. Many greeted Ava with warm smiles as she walked back toward her original seat. The elderly woman gently touched her arm. I saved your window seat. Ava smiled, thank you. Melissa stood at the aircraft door. When Ava reached her, she spoke softly, I'm sorry. Ava looked at her. You tried. Melissa's eyes became moist. I should have tried harder. Ava answered with kindness instead of blame. We all learn. Melissa nodded slowly. She knew she would remember those words for the rest of her career. As the aircraft door finally closed, Richard watched from the terminal windows with Kevin beside him. The engine started. The airplane slowly pushed back from the gate. For everyone on board, it looked like another ordinary departure. For Richard Hayes, it marked the beginning of an entirely different journey, one that would not be measured by flight hours or successful landings. It would be measured by whether he could face the uncomfortable truth that the greatest danger to good judgment is believing it never needs to be questioned. The story spread far beyond Boston before the airplane reached California. Not because Victoria Carter called reporters. She never did. It spread because passengers talked. An elderly couple told their family what they had witnessed. A businessman wrote a thoughtful letter to Aurora National instead of posting angry comments online. Melissa submitted a detailed statement that described every moment exactly as it happened. None of them exaggerated. They simply told the truth. Within a week, Aurora National completed its formal review. The findings were direct. Captain Richard Hayes had violated company policy by removing a passenger without objective evidence to support his decision. His actions had delayed a scheduled flight, created unnecessary operational risk, and failed to meet the airline's own standards for professional judgment. There was no dramatic press conference, no public humiliation. The company announced only that a senior captain had been removed from active flight status pending mandatory retraining and further employment review. Inside the company, however, the message was much stronger. Every pilot, every flight attendant, every station manager, every customer service employee, they received updated guidance emphasizing one principle: authority carries responsibility. It never replaces evidence. Several weeks later, Richard walked into a quiet conference room for his final review meeting. The walls were plain, no cameras, no audience. Just 3 company representatives. The director of flight operations spoke first. Captain Hayes, before we discuss the committee's decision, we'd like to ask whether you've reviewed the witness statements. I have. What did you learn? Richard remained silent for several seconds. Then he answered with unusual honesty. I kept looking for something that justified what I did. He lowered his eyes. I never found it. The room stayed quiet. He continued. I confused confidence with certainty. No one interrupted. I thought experience meant I could trust every instinct. He looked toward the window. I stopped asking myself whether I could prove what I believed. The Human Resources Director slowly nodded. Thank you for saying that. Richard took a deep breath. I've replayed that morning every day. He paused. The young woman never argued. No, she never disrespected me, no. She simply expected to be treated fairly. The director answered quietly, as every passenger should. Richard nodded. I understand that now. Across the country, Ava was settling into her first semester at college. Life had become surprisingly normal again. She attended lectures, met new classmates, worked in the library, called her mother every Sunday evening. One afternoon, she received an unexpected email from Aurora National. The company invited her to participate in developing new customer respect training for frontline employees. She looked at the message for a long time before replying. Her answer contained only one condition. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for publicity. She wrote one sentence. If my experience can help this from happening to someone else, I will gladly participate. Victoria smiled after reading her daughter's response. I knew you'd say yes. I almost said no. What changed your mind? Ava looked across the kitchen table. I kept thinking about Melissa. The flight attendant? She apologized. Victoria nodded. She did. She wasn't the one who made the decision. No, but she wanted to become better because of it. Ava smiled softly. If people are willing to learn, they deserve the chance. Victoria reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. That's leadership. A month later, Melissa attended the first training session. She was surprised to see Ava standing at the front of the room, beside professional instructors. Not as a victim, as a contributor. Ava spoke calmly. I don't want anyone here to feel guilty. The room listened. I want us to remember that every passenger arrives carrying a story we cannot see. Some were grieving, some were celebrating, some were afraid of flying. Some were returning home, she paused. And some are simply hoping to be treated with the same dignity you would want for your own family. No one wrote anything for several seconds. They simply listened. Melissa felt tears forming again, not because she remembered that painful morning, because she realized one respectful decision from a crew member could change someone's entire memory of a journey. Across another part of the city, Richard sat alone on a park bench watching airplanes pass overhead. The familiar sound of jet engines no longer reminded him of authority. It reminded him of responsibility. For the first time in many years, he understood that the strongest people are not those who never make mistakes. They are the ones willing to face them honestly, learn from them, and make sure others never have to repeat them. A year later, very few people at Aurora National remembered the flight number, but almost everyone remembered what it had changed. New training programs had become part of every employee's first week. Managers were taught to ask one simple question before making difficult decisions. What facts do I actually have? It sounded ordinary, yet it quietly transformed the culture. Employees began slowing down before making assumptions. Complaints decreased. Customer trust slowly climbed. The biggest change was not found in a report. It was found in thousands of small moments where people chose respect over impulse. Ava Carter returned to Boston that spring to speak at the airline's annual leadership conference. She walked into the auditorium wearing another simple navy jacket, carrying the same quiet confidence she had shown at the airport months before. Hundreds of employees stood and applauded as she reached the stage. The applause was not for her family's influence. It was for the grace she had shown when she had every reason to respond with anger. She stood behind the podium and smiled. I've been asked many times whether I hate flying now. A few people smiled. The answer is no. The room became still. I love flying because airplanes connect people who would never otherwise meet. What happened to me wasn't caused by aviation. It was caused by assumptions. And assumptions can exist anywhere. She looked around the room. We all make them. The difference is whether we are willing to question them before they hurt someone. No one checked a phone. No one whispered. Every word felt personal. In life, you will meet people who look ordinary. Some will have great influence. Others will not. The truth is they all deserve the same dignity. Respect should never depend on someone's job title, bank account, race, age, or family name. The audience rose to its feet before she had even finished speaking. Victoria watched quietly from the back of the room. She never stepped onto the stage. She never mentioned the companies she owned. She wanted the lesson to belong to everyone, not to her. After the conference ended, Melissa found Ava near the lobby. "I've been promoted," she said with a smile. "Congratulations. I almost left the airline after that day." "I'm glad you didn't," Melissa nodded. "I stayed because I realized something." "What was that?" "Courage isn't always standing up first. Sometimes it's deciding you'll stand up next time." Ava smiled warmly. "I think a lot of passengers will be grateful you made that choice." Across town, Richard Hayes was living a quieter life. He had officially retired from commercial aviation. On clear afternoons, he volunteered at a local aviation museum, speaking with young students who dreamed of becoming pilots. He rarely talked about awards or difficult landings anymore. Instead, he always ended his presentation the same ski. A pilot is trusted with lives. That trust begins long before the airplane leaves the ground. Never let confidence become more important than fairness. One afternoon, a teenage student asked him, "What was the most important lesson you ever learned?" Richard paused before answering. "The hardest one." The student waited. "I learned that experience can sharpen your judgment, but only humility keeps it honest." Back in Chicago, Victoria and Ava stood together watching another passenger jet climb into the evening sky. Victoria smiled. "You know, people still think this story is about power." Ava shook her head. "It never was." "What was it about?" Ava looked toward the disappearing aircraft. "It was about choosing humanity before assumptions." Victoria slipped an arm around her daughter. "And that's a lesson worth protecting." The sunset painted the clouds in soft shades of gold as another ordinary flight disappeared into the horizon, carrying strangers whose stories no one yet knew. Some would become lifelong friends. Some would never meet again. But each person on board deserved to begin their journey with the same simple gift: to be seen as a human being first. If this story stayed with you, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe for more meaningful stories and share your thoughts in the comments with these 3 words. Choose kindness always.